welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm Catherine Hadro in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thanks for joining us. In this week's show, he's a saint. Pope Paul VI, who wrote Humanae Vitae, is canonized in Rome. Louisiana's Attorney General breaks down a recent court ruling that upholds a pro-life law. And this.
My dream is to be an ER.
We introduce you to a college program that empowers students with intellectual or developmental disabilities. But first, Planned Parenthood launches a multi-million-dollar campaign to provide abortions, quote, no matter what happens at the Supreme Court. The aggressive plan was billed as Planned Parenthood's strategy in the event the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. Planned Parenthood says its plan will work to, quote, ensure access to abortion on three fronts: access, policy, and culture change. The nation's largest abortion business says it will also work to reduce stigma attached to abortion by working with the music, fashion, movie, and television industries. This announcement follows Justice Brett Kavanaugh's first day on the Supreme Court last week, though Planned Parenthood claims they've been working on this plan since President Donald Trump took office. For Pro-Life Reaction, we are joined by Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Marjorie, grateful to have you here as we near the midterms.
Always. Oh, wow. It's a busy time and beautiful.
It really is. Yep. And amidst this busy time, Planned Parenthood has made this announcement. What do you make of their multi-million-dollar strategy? What's their game plan here?
They know that they're losing. They feel their policy, their agenda going down the tubes. The idea that they're going to re-up their game in Hollywood is something that they should do. If I were their consultant, I would tell them they should do that. But they've had these relationships for decades. They've had the upper hand for decades. Now they're on complete defense. They realize that the court is moving in the opposite direction of their agenda, and they're very worried, and they should be.
Their plan says they want to provide abortions, quote, no matter what happens at the Supreme Court. Does this mean a complete disregard for the law?
I think we've seen a lot of lawlessness, a lot of sense of no boundaries, a lot of sense of who cares what's in the Constitution. We're going to demand what we want lately. I'm speaking of the Kavanaugh hearings in particular. I think two things about that comment. One, are you willing really to go into a back alley situation that you've always been arguing against, that no matter what the law is, regardless of protections for women and for unborn children, that's where you want to go? The second piece I see is very related, which is their big agenda is for mifeprex, chemical abortion, medical abortion, to be basically at arm's length, no matter where you are as a woman. If you ever think that you would like to have an abortion, don't think it through. Just go pick it up at your local pharmacy. And maybe if you're a 15-year-old, you should have access to that, whether your parents know or not. Your daughter might be having an abortion in your own home without your knowledge. If they are successful at this, it takes abortion out of any perceived medical climate and puts it back into the, quote, privacy and lack of health standards of your own home.
So you think increase the medical abortions is what they're aiming to do, which is the abortion pill, taking two pills.
That's right. That's right.
How should the pro-life movement respond to this?
I think we should take great hope in the fact that we are seizing a beautiful moment where abortion policy is going to completely change direction if we stay on top of this. And what I mean by that is that Roe is very likely to be messed with, gutted, overturned. In any case, we see a possibility that more pro-life protections will be upheld. We'll be able to actually address the needs of mother and child in a life-affirming way for both. And we have to look strategically. What states are going to do that first? What do we need to be doing, matching on the right side what Planned Parenthood is doing, with courage that our message is bold and beautiful and more attractive and better planned out about how to actually help women and children.
That's a beautiful reminder. And finally, I want to go back to that culture issue. They said they want to change culture through working with the music, fashion, movie, and television industries. Again, what does this tell us about their strategy and who's winning the culture war?
Well, I think for a long time we've ceded the victory to them on the cultural level because their messages are loud and obvious. We turn on the TV, we see them all the time. At the same time that's been happening over the decades, the pro-life movement has gained strength. In the last decade, we've gone from complete defense to complete offense in every legislature in the country and on the national level. So we should be doing the same thing. Of course, we're doing it right now, addressing culture. Politics is also culture. We should definitely continue to avail our strengths and dig deeper in the places, especially in the country, right, as we start to strengthen laws that really need those messages the most.
Absolutely. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Thank you.
Thank you.
With less than 20 days left, the countdown to the 2018 midterm elections is on. While midterm elections historically have lower turnout rates, the stakes this year are incredibly high, and the pro-life movement needs to show up at the polls. With that in mind, here is this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and pledge to vote pro-life this November. Once you get to prolifeweekly.com, you can enter in your name and basic information to sign this petition. Be sure to share with your friends and neighbors so they remember to keep life in mind this November. The pro-life issue is a foundational one. How a political candidate views the most vulnerable gives us a key insight into his or her values. Being pro-life must be a priority. We just saw with the recent Kavanaugh confirmation process how important each and every Senate vote can be. It's a reminder that we need pro-lifers to fill both the House and the Senate to advance the pro-life cause. With the clock ticking until November 6th, be sure to register to vote, educate yourself on your state's candidates, and go to prolifeweekly.com to pledge to vote pro-life. Turning now to more pro-life news, a federal appeals court panel recently upheld a Louisiana law requiring basic safety standards in abortion clinics. The 2014 law requires abortionists have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital in case of an emergency. A panel at the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the legislation in a 2-to-1 vote last month, distinguishing it from a Texas law that was struck down at the Supreme Court. Our next guest has been on the forefront of this ongoing legal challenge. Joining us now from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is Louisiana's Attorney General, Jeff Landry. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
First off, can you explain exactly what Act 620 requires?
Yeah, so what Act 620 did was basically make admitting privileges uniform across the state of Louisiana. So at any outpatient center, any ambulatory center, the doctor was required to have admitting privileges. That was true before 620, except there was an exception for abortion clinics. And so all the legislature did was just make it uniform throughout Louisiana so that at outpatient centers, ambulatory centers, the doctors were required to have admitting privileges to hospitals.
And can you explain why was it challenged in the first place?
Well, because again, we see those pro-abortion forces around the country always trying to single out little bitty things in an effort to hold on to their particular stance on abortion. And this was really not about abortion clinics. This was about women's health. This was about ensuring that we had a uniform set of rules that governed outpatient centers all across Louisiana. So whether a woman walked into a clinic to have her tonsils taken out, the doctor there would be required to have admitting privileges. And so in abortion clinics in Louisiana, we said that those doctors would have to have admitting privileges as well.
Now, the Supreme Court in 2016 struck down a Texas admitting privileges law. What differentiates the Texas law from the Louisiana one?
Well, the Texas law was patently different than Louisiana's law. In Texas didn't have a law that where basically they regulated ambulatory centers, where they outpatient centers, where they required doctors to have admitting privileges. So they went out and specifically targeted abortion clinics. It was actually the reverse here in Louisiana. So in Louisiana, again, outpatient centers required admitting privileges except for abortion clinics. And so what Louisiana's law did was, again, Act 620 did, was make it uniform. And so that's why we believe that our law is constitutional.
You hit on this a bit earlier, but can you explain why are admitting privilege laws in the interest of patient health and safety? And do these laws benefit women as well as unborn children?
Well, it certainly benefits women's health. I mean, think about this. If you go down to the doctor to have a small sinus operation or some procedure which requires sedation, okay, then in Louisiana, that doctor would be required to have an admitting privilege, because if something goes wrong in that particular procedure, you would want him to be able to admit you to the nearest hospital in case there is a life-threatening issue that comes up during that procedure. And so again, here in Louisiana, what we did was we made it uniform so that whether it's at any outpatient center, any ambulatory center, is going to require that doctor to have admitting privileges. And that's in the best interest of women's health.
And if such laws are in the interest of the woman's health and safety, what's been your reaction to abortion advocates really objecting to them?
Well, I find it to be hypocritical because, again, wouldn't you, again, abortion advocates out there go out and they claim that it's all about women's health. Well, Louisiana's law protects women's health. It ensures that there is a uniform application for women whether they go into any type of procedure that requires heavy sedation. So again, they should not be treated differently if they're going to get an abortion or whether they're going to get their tonsils or adenoids taken out.
Act 620 has been upheld. Are you expecting any more pushback or opposition in the future to it?
Well, currently right now, in the June medical case, they are actually taking the ruling by the Fifth Circuit panel and asking for an en banc hearing. So again, we still haven't finished all of the legal procedures at the appeals level, but we're hoping that that the Fifth Circuit will deny the en banc hearing and uphold the panel's decision.
And finally, you yourself have been very outspoken about your pro-life views. Can you explain here in our program, why are you pro-life?
Well, again, look, I was always raised to respect life, right, in order to protect and preserve life. And I made no bones about it, whether I was serving in the U.S. Congress or as the Attorney General. In this particular instance, I'm out there ensuring that we uphold the will of the Louisiana legislature.
Jeff Landry, Louisiana Attorney General, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Going now from the United States to the global church, Pope Francis canonizes 7 saints, including Pope Paul VI. Some 70,000 faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square for the canonization Mass this past Sunday. In his homily, Pope Francis called now St. Paul VI a prophet of a church turned outwards to care for the faraway poor. Pope Paul VI was elected Pope in 1963 when the sexual revolution was in full swing. He might be best known for his 1968 encyclical Humanae Vitae, which strongly rebuked the use of artificial contraception and upheld the Church's teachings on life. He was canonized alongside Archbishop Oscar Romero. Joining us from Rome is Dr. Matthew Bunson, an EWTN Senior Contributor and author of the new book, Saint Pope Paul VI, celebrating the 262nd Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Matthew, you were at the canonization Mass for Pope Paul VI and the 6 other new saints. Can you give us the canonization highlights?
Well, the canonization of new saints, in other words, proclaiming new saints for the universal church, is one of those great events in the life of the church. We are able to celebrate the lives, but especially the sanctity of, in this case, 7 new men and women. One of them happened to be, of course, Pope Paul VI, now Pope St. Paul VI, as well as Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, a martyr who is particularly important to Pope Francis. And then we also had the canonizations of 2 nuns, 2 priests, and a young layperson by the name of Nuncio Sulprizio, who died under horrific circumstances of an amputation and then bone cancer, but did so with such extraordinary grace and love that he became known in his native Naples as the Little Lame Saint, even before he died.
St. Pope Paul VI might best be remembered for his encyclical Humanae Vitae. Can you, Matthew, summarize his prophetic and bold writings on life for us?
Well, in a nutshell, Pope Paul VI was responding to one of the great questions of his time. can artificial contraception be considered licit for Catholics? And after what we all know is a very controversial process of commissions and decisions, he issued Humani Vitae in 1968 as a definitive answer to that starting question that had been plaguing Catholics and Christians throughout much of the 20th century. In his encyclical, he stated categorically that you cannot interrupt the procession of life. You cannot separate the unitive and procreative aspects of married life. And in doing so, however, and in Humani Vitae, he forcefully anticipated, prophetically looked forward to the contraceptive culture that we have today, warning Catholics, warning the world of what would happen if it actually embraced contraception as a mainstay of everyday life. And he also warned, again prophetically, that there would come a day when the state would have a vested interest in imposing contraception on its own people. We're seeing that across the globe in such places as China and increasingly even in the United States. So Humani Vitae, while controversial, remains one of those powerful statements for the modern world, and more Catholics and even non-Catholics are recognizing his wisdom as we're in a new century plagued with the dire results of a contraceptive mentality.
Absolutely, and I understand both of the miracles that paved the way for St. Pope Paul VI involved unborn children. Can you tell us more about that?
They did. It's hard to imagine two more fitting miracles to take place for the author of Humani Vitae, for the Pope who defended the dignity of the human person, the dignity of life, as Pope Paul VI did, to have miracles that led to his canonization, both of them involving in utero unborn children. The first happened in the 1990s in California, of all places, and the second, the one that actually led to his canonization, occurred in 2014. When a mother who was being encouraged in Verona to have an abortion because of her troubled pregnancy went to Brescia and actually prayed at the tomb or the shrine related to Pope Paul VI. And a miracle then happened. And as is always the case, both of those miracles were investigated very thoroughly by the Holy See in order to determine their validity, and both were confirmed. So one led to his beatification, the other to his canonization. And again, we cannot possibly think of something that would be more appropriate than those two miracles.
It's so fitting. And finally, Matthew, what is a message you think our world today needs to hear from now St. Pope Paul VI?
Well, we have the message of Humani Vitae from Pope Paul VI, but there was something else he said in his very last days when he had a homily just before he died in August of 1978. In the midst of all of the turmoil surrounding the Church and the years after the Second Vatican Council, he said that I have remained faithful. And it is Paul VI's fidelity, even in the midst of the rejection by so many of Humani Vitae, the rejection of the teachings of the Council, the rejections of the Church's authority. He said that he remained faithful to his love for Christ and was calling on Catholics, on everyone, to remain faithful as well. And that's a clarion call, I think, for a society that is not very faithful to its own ideals and certainly not to the Christian ideals of life.
Let's listen to that new saint. Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN Senior Contributor and author of the new book, St. Pope Paul VI, celebrating the 262nd Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Thank you, as usual, for your great insight and safe travels back to D.C.
Take care and God bless.
When we come back.
I want to stay in George Mason is Hollywood film director.
Yes, they can. An innovative program empowers young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities to get a post-secondary education. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. Planned Parenthood rolls out a flashy new campaign that brings us to this week's Speak Out segment. As we mentioned at the top of the show, Planned Parenthood recently announced a multi-million-dollar strategy to enable it to perform abortion, quote, no matter what happens at the Supreme Court. Planned Parenthood says the plan will ensure abortion on three fronts: access, policy, and culture change, by collaborating with the entertainment industry to destigmatize abortion. Planned Parenthood is a powerful, well-funded organization with allies in Washington and Hollywood. Just this week, the Washington Post ran a fluff piece profiling Planned Parenthood's new president, Dr. Lena Wen. Planned Parenthood has recruited cultural influencers like Shonda Rhimes, the creator of TV shows including Grey's Anatomy, to sit on their board. But even with all of these resources, they are having to take these steps because they are losing the culture war. All of the flashy public relations campaigns and attention from the entertainment industry can't mask the truth that life is sacred and worthy of protection from conception to natural death, and abortion violently and unjustly kills a human life. Planned Parenthood is nervous about the future of Roe, and it should be. It's important now more than ever for the pro-life movement to continue its peaceful, prayerful quest to win hearts and minds. Because no matter how hard Planned Parenthood tries, money can't buy truth. And remember, there is always something you can do from home each week to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and pledge to vote pro-life this November. This Down Syndrome Awareness Month, we introduce you to a program empowering students with Down syndrome and other developmental and intellectual disabilities to further their education and live a fulfilling life. Here's this week's Pro-Life Focus.
It's a lot of fun. It's a really good opportunity to be here.
Young adults whose disabilities have traditionally excluded them from higher education are able to take a seat in the classroom at George Mason University, where Dr. Heidi Graff is program director of the school's Mason Life program.
Two of our major goals for the program are for students to seek meaningful employment after graduation, and then also to have community integration. Our students come in and they have some foundational academic classes that they need to take, kind of building blocks, getting ready classes, so that then starting their second semester they go out and they take regular catalog classes. They do so with support, and it's for non-credit, so we're able to modify the course as much as the student might need.
The Mason Life program provides a post-secondary education for students with a variety of intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are approximately 50 students, supported by about 100 staff members. While the classroom is diverse, the students and alumnus we interviewed happen to all have Down syndrome and are all Catholic.
I love being Catholic so much. It's kind of so important.
Upon meeting them, it's clear these young adults dream big.
My biggest dream is to become a pop star.
I want to become a Hollywood film director.
My dream is to be an ER nurse.
In a world that points out differences, the Mason Life program reminds us how ultimately we're all alike.
Perhaps they need to have more systematic teaching, and perhaps they need more support. But the end goal is the same. All students who go to university want to graduate and have a meaningful job.
Just like the rest of the George Mason University Patriots, these Mason Life students are learning how to be adults. The program's independent living classes and internship opportunities prepare them for the real world.
Through independent living, they show me how to respect other people, like two people need to cook in the kitchen together.
I work at a preschool called Child Development Center.
I get to learn other buildings, which is pretty cool. So the first experience with the buildings that I had is of coming to class and coming back to the dorms. So I could figure that out on my own and I did all by myself.
Patrick, or PK Kelly, a recent alumnus of Mason Life, has carried the lessons he learned from the program on to 2 jobs.
I work in a Giant. First week I'm doing is bagging groceries, and normally I helping people out, and I got another job on Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is my internship, and I am working at Brian Fitzpatrick's office, and I open envelopes.
The staff at George Mason Life say the growth is astounding.
Growth. I've definitely seen a lot of confidence, especially in regards to their reading, and a real ownership of that they can do work, not only in our classrooms, which are more self-contained, but also when they go to take classes around George Mason campus. Personally, I see a lot of independence too. And once again, I can go around campus. I can figure out how I want to get around the community. I can be a successful member of the community once I graduate too.
So one of my greatest things to see is a student come to us who maybe didn't have those skills. Maybe they just knew how to sort their laundry, and they graduate and they not only know how to do all of their laundry skills, but to cook their meals and to have time management, to be able to budget their money. That's a joy.
These students are not defined by disabilities or the can'ts. They're empowered to know they can.
Being a college student can be a little stressful sometimes after high school, but become a college student is really fun.
My favorite thing being college is making new friends, making happy faces on each other's face.
I think George Mason is a really good opportunity because it's really amazing school and people just love it here, and it's like a big family to us. And it's a lot of fun. We have like a connection to us.
Mason Life grads have exceeded goals and gained new ground. And if your office hires a person with an intellectual and developmental disability, maybe then you can grow too.
We're finding that the student, of course, gains tremendous skills, but the real change are the other people in the office, the people without the disability. It opens their mind to all that people can do, all that people can relate to. So that's the big change, and it's life-changing.
That'll do it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, but I'd love to hear from you before next week. Email me at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or like my public page on Facebook so we can keep this pro-life conversation going. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.